Live from Sydney, I'm Paul Allen, and this is Inside, where we dive deeper into the stories that matter with crucial context and sharp analysis. Well, the US pauses strikes on Iran for a second night as Tehran halts retaliation and opens talks with Oman on shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Oil tumbles as tensions ease for now. Stocks gaining and the dollar weaker as investors dial back fears over Middle East energy supplies. Indonesia's central bank governor resigns, unexpectedly shaking investor confidence as President Prabowo loses another key policymaker. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi yields to student pressure as the country's education minister resigns, signalling a rare but significant political setback. We'll assess the implications. And China memory chip champion CXMT surges after a record-setting IPO, underscoring investor enthusiasm for AI infrastructure and Beijing's drive for semiconductor self-sufficiency. Our top story today, a fragile calm settling over the Middle East, with the US and Iran holding fire after weeks of escalating tensions. The US military's held off strikes since late Friday without explanation or announcement. The Islamic Republic, meanwhile, signaling it was refraining from any retaliatory attacks. US Ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz, says President Trump is giving diplomacy some space.
The president is keeping all options on the table. I've spoken with the negotiators. I've spoken with Secretary Hegseth. What the president is doing right now, as we've seen all along, is giving some talks some space. Talks are ongoing. They're happening at every level, from the more technical aspect of it all the way to the highest levels, of course.
For more, Bloomberg's Middle East correspondent Abir Abu Omar joins us from Dubai. So, Abir, the president giving talks some space. I mean, it's not peace, but at least it's not conflict at the moment. So where are we? And what's the state of play with talks for a more lasting solution?
Good morning, Paul. Yeah, you're right. A sense of calmness this morning in the Middle East after 13 straight days of U.S. attacks on Iran. The U.S. Suddenly on Friday stopped attacking. Now, President Trump and the United States did not provide an explanation as to why that has happened or why the fighting was halted. But the New York Times reported earlier that that could have been possibly because of fears of the U.S. running out of munition. The Wall Street Journal afterwards cited President Trump saying that actually munition is in good state. So we're seeing that the fighting has stopped nonetheless. Iran on Sunday saying that in return of the U.S. stopping its fighting, it will also halt attacks on the Strait of Hormuz and neighboring countries in the GCC. Now, as a result of all of this, Paul, we've seen what is happening to energy prices, as you see on the screen, dropping altogether for a second straight day as a result of this fighting in the Middle East. Taking a pause now, we don't know if we're going to see a return to these attacks. President Trump before Friday told Axios that he's preparing for a massive attack on Iran following those consecutive days of attacking infrastructure, not only energy infrastructure, but we're seeing IRGC infrastructure was getting attacked, bridges in the middle of Iran getting attacked as well. And so we're seeing that stopping for the time being. Now, where does that leave the state of talks? We know that Oman and Iranian officials had met over the weekend to discuss the state of play in the Strait of Hormuz. Traffic is still pretty much paralyzed in the Strait of Hormuz. We're seeing parallel fighting between Houthis and Saudi Arabia that is also putting the strait at the Red Sea at risk. And so we're seeing the impact on energy prices that have reached, or for Brent, that have reached over $100 a barrel last week. This all seems to be alleviating for the time being, but we continue to monitor the state of the talks and where the wider negotiations, Paul, over the MOU that was reached in June in Switzerland will be at going forward.
You mentioned shipping there in the Strait of Hormuz and Iran's promise as well not to attack ships. Obviously, there'll be still a sense of nervousness for ship owners. What are ship owners and the markets waiting to see before we might see traffic resuming and before we might see that oil price come down a little more?
Yeah, Paul, just a more solid return to diplomacy. Now, we saw a return to diplomacy when that MOU with the 14 concessions, if you remember, was signed in June in Switzerland. That all seems to be out of the window now with the attacks continuing between Iran and the United States. And don't forget that the deadline for that MOU or reaching that temporary ceasefire towards a more permanent agreement is approaching very fast, August 16. So just about a couple of weeks from now, and all the concessions in that MOU, the nuclear component, Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz, the frozen assets, and everything we've been discussing over the past couple of months or so, really, that all seems to have taken a back seat with the return of those escalations. And so what ship owners, what the movement in the Strait of Hormuz really hinges on at the moment is just some solid evidence that we're going to see a permanent resolution between Iran and the United States. But until then, ships are going to be treading with caution. For the time being, we're not seeing a lot of movement. And then just don't forget that we're seeing an escalation on yet another front now between the Houthis, which are Iran-backed, and Saudi Arabia in the Red Sea. Now, this is a war that's been going on for about 12 years now, and a truce between the two parties has been very shaky. But now things seem to be picking up with the Houthis attacking Aramco-linked facilities in Jizan and Yanbar in Saudi Arabia. We don't have confirmation from the Saudi government, but that is a very real threat on energy prices across the board, Paul.
All right, Bloomberg's Middle East correspondent Sabir Abu Omar, thank you. Now, Asian stocks are trading a bit mixed as US strikes on Iran ease, with the focus on AI trade. China's homegrown chip champion, CXMT, is surging on its trading debut. Avril Huang joins us in Singapore with the latest on the markets. Avril, what are you watching?
Yeah, Paul, we are seeing, of course, there was a bit of a rebound from Friday's onslaught in the region, but it's looking a bit more tentative now among the big three, the Nikkei, TAIEX, KOSPI in the Asia Pacific. And this is despite oil prices slipping. We are seeing how Brent has moved even further away from the 100 level, at one point dipping below $90, although it is pairing some of those earlier losses. And this is coming against the backdrop of it being a pivotal week for markets. Given how the Fed decision is due, traders are still focused on whether they will hike. And even if they don't, officials are expected to urge vigilance for the inflationary impact from energy prices. Now, oil prices trending in this manner, that's helpful for much of EMs in terms of bonds and currencies. But stocks today are really not playing ball. If you flip the board, I'll talk you through what we are seeing in terms of the AI trade that continued unwinding in the picks and shovels aspect of that. And this is coming, of course, at a time where if you look at the Intel market performance post-earnings, it was a clean beat, but it still sank 8%, which speaks to, I think, how investors increasingly are worried that these huge capital expenditures are not going to translate into huge enough profits, especially given what we've been seeing in the market performance post-earnings. Whether you're talking about some of these memory makers or among the hyperscalers, investors seem less than impressed when you look at the market reaction. And then also adding to the theme, the Wall Street Journal report of how Nvidia is in talks with OpenAI to guarantee financing to the tune of $250 billion for a data center. Now, aside from that, we also have maybe some of these concerns in the market. You think about how Chinese chip makers have been ramping up efforts. Maybe eventually that helps to address the memory squeeze. And today, of course, one company that is in the spotlight that's made its trading debut in Shanghai after a $9.8 billion IPO, which is the second largest ever in China, extending gains. Now you're looking at Changxin Memory climbing almost 480% in trade. And forget that, right? We also have Nomura saying that it can go 1,200% above its IPO price as it clinches market share. This is one company that has managed to tap into investor appetite for the memory chip story. And certainly this is also seen as China's best shot at reducing reliance among foreign suppliers. Also another encouraging sign I would just highlight, not just how Changxin is doing its trade, but along with it, take a look at how the Chinex is also faring in the green today. So a lot of that focus still on AI. Paul?
All right, thanks very much, Averill. Let's get some more market insights now with our next guest, who cites tech and AI as among her top conviction calls. Joining us now from Singapore is Polka Mishra, partner at Javelin Wealth Management. Polka, thanks for joining us. And I want to start with that CXMT IPO, if I can. You know, amid all the hype about spending capex on AI, I mean, still a lot of appetite for this story. Is that a stock you'd be buying at the moment?
That's a very difficult question to answer. If you go with Nomura's targets, then definitely it's still just a third of the way there. But on the whole, yes, we are positive on the AI story, but very selectively so. And this morning's events, it highlights why China is an important player and why it is not prudent to ignore investments in the China AI story, whether it is infrastructure plays, whether it is memory, whether it's a picks and shovels, and even the models coming out of China. So definitely an overweight for us. Across the board in the US, we're looking as well at the AI story. We're seeing upside, but unlike what we've done before, where it was a broad market story, we are picking more of the businesses that are solving the bottlenecks right now, that are part of the infrastructure as opposed to the application layer.
It's an interesting market that we're seeing today, and that we're broadly positive, with two notable exceptions, those being the Kospi and the TAIEX in Taiwan as well. And, you know, the commentary around this whole story seems to oscillate between capex concerns, circular deal making, and then on the other side, the longer term growth outlook for AI. So when you see something like the drawbacks that we're seeing in the Kospi and the TAIEX today, do you buy those dips, or do you just take a breath and wait?
I think there is still there's still possible potential upside in Kospi TAIEX. Look, these markets have run up quite strongly, so there is an element of profit booking that is happening. There is the unwind of the leverage trade as well, which brings a bit more rationality to the market. Now, the run up, say for example in Kospi, has been about the two stocks. It's Samsung and SK Hynix, but what that has eclipsed is the underlying fundamental story of the Korea trade. It is around corporate reform, shareholder value, and a lot of that has still to be priced into the market. And looking beyond these two stocks, the other sectors, more than 50% of them have had earnings upgrade within the last quarter. So there is more value to be unlocked in these markets. Investors just have to be a lot more patient, because the retail capital, the leverage trade, the money flow in and out is what is impacting the volatility, and it's going to continue to remain volatile.
Well, you mentioned liking the picks and shovels aspect of this trade, and you're certainly not alone on that. So what does a good allocation look like, which if you're putting together an AI portfolio between chip manufacturers, the energy story as well, and a regional approach also? How do you balance the US against some of these big names emerging in Asia?
You have to have allocation to all. You have to spread your bets. Now, it's not just a US story, and slowly it's also not just a two-horse story as the market is talking about it. It's not just US, it is not just China. So yes, there is an application layer, but the question around that is monetization. So maybe a smaller allocation to that is still the hyperscalers of the US, but they are underwater this year, even though the NASDAQ is up. Infrastructure, data center plays in the US, again, infrastructure, AI value chain in China, memory in Korea, Taiwan. That is how you spread out. There's still some allocation to Japan there, but it's not as big a story as these four markets.
The AI story is sucking a huge amount of oxygen out of the room at the moment. Are there any unappreciated parts of the market away from this narrative that are just generating good, solid returns, and which are perhaps unappreciated?
Yes, and actually these I'm not sure if they are unappreciated. If you look at the banking sector, that has performed quite strongly, and with expectation of interest rates remaining high, it's going to remain a beneficiary, whether it is in the United States, whether you see even in Japan. I think there may be some I think they've done all right in India. There may be more recovery coming through as well. So these are the sectors, infrastructure as such. Some defensives have done well. Defense sector as well, in whether it's in Europe or US, is something to be looked at. So staying away from the big energy dependent sectors and for probably exports in emerging markets. The rest of the sectors have done quite all right this year.
All right, well, you mentioned India. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Polka Mishra, a partner at Javelin Wealth Management, is sticking around. And still ahead, Indonesia's central bank chief unexpectedly resigning, raising fresh questions about policy continuity and central bank independence. We'll have more on that next. This is Bloomberg. We are keeping an eye on Indonesian assets after Bank Indonesia Governor Perry Warjiyo resigned 2 years ahead of his term expiring. Jakarta Bureau Chief Ben Otto is following the story, joins us now with more. So Ben, can you tell us about what happened here? That was something of a surprise.
Yeah, good morning. It was a surprise. We woke up to a hastily organized press conference by Bank Indonesia at 7:30, and we're given the news. Mr. Warjiyo was not in attendance. We were told that he had stepped down over the weekend for personal reasons. It's a big surprise. Like you said, he had 2 years left. He was widely seen as a steady hand. We haven't heard directly from him. What we do know is that he'd been under pressure at Bank Indonesia to more closely align the bank with the government's goals of boosting growth, and that he had been working on that, but there had also been signs that Bank Indonesia's independence was being slightly eroded. Some moves in parliament that gave lawmakers more oversight and say into what goes on at the bank. So, we've woken up to a surprise, and markets are trying to make sense of it.
Yeah, markets trying to make sense of it. How about the Indonesia population? How is this being viewed locally?
Locally, a lot of confusion, wondering if it marks a real change in Bank Indonesia's direction. There has been some communication from a government press agency about the need for greater alignment between the government and Bank Indonesia, and some outpointing of places where coordination is more coordinated, say in Japan or China or Singapore. And so there's a sense that maybe that's where we're headed now. Just a lot of questions about whether the acting governor at Bank Indonesia will stay in place for long. And then wondering in markets what this is going to mean. So far, we've seen some subdued reactions today, but the rupiah is a little bit weaker, still hovering around that all-time low. Stock market is down. So big questions about what this will mean for any policy change at Bank Indonesia.
All right, Bloomberg's Jakarta Bureau Chief Ben Otto there, thank you. Polka Mishra, a partner at Javelin Wealth Management, is still with us. And Polka, I'd be interested in your view on this surprise resignation by Bank Indonesia's governor for personal reasons. What do you make of this?
We don't look at it as a positive development. It increases our concerns around Indonesia, which already were around governance. So we've had a negative outlook on Indonesia. We have not allocated to that market. It'll have bigger implications in terms of come November, when the decision with regards to whether it remains emerging market or gets downgraded to frontier category. And that could not just have an implication in terms of market valuation, but a lot of money from fund managers who are supposed to allocate to emerging markets may move out of the country. So remains to be seen who replaces the governor, but definitely not a positive development. He was looked at, as you were talking about it, as a steady hand. The increased rates had kept the rupiah stable, so it's a very big question mark at this point.
Yeah, you say you haven't allocated to Indonesia. I'm just wondering the reasons for that. Do you share MSCI's concerns about, governance, transparency, the free float requirement, and then, of course, incidents like this and the resignation of the finance minister as well? Are those the reasons, or is it something else that causes you to steer clear?
Yes, along with a few others. So there are a few fundamental positives in Indonesia. The growth rate has been stable. It's a big domestic market, but again, it's also an importer of energy. So that's one reason to be concerned. The currency does tend to whipsaw. The weakness of currency affects foreign investors when you convert your investments into US dollar. But yes, a big concern is around governance. We are wary of markets where there are concerns around governance and you can be caught off guard. So yeah, all those reasons combined together, not just governance.
Some investors do like Indonesia and India as well because of its lack of an AI story. Do you look at, you're not allocated to Indonesia, but is that one of the reasons to look at India at the moment as a hedge against that story?
Yes, so Mark, India's allocation and reason for allocation in the portfolio has changed over the years. Yes, it does not have the AI story, and that's why money has flown out of India. But the domestic demand story is strong. Governance is a lot stronger. GDP growth rates for one of the large markets in the world, this is the highest GDP growth rate still. So on the whole, it does have that element of stability in the portfolio, but the concern there's still a lot of headwinds which have impacted the returns on the Indian markets, and one of the biggest ones is the currency again. So last year markets were up around 13% in domestic currency, but when you convert your investments to US dollar, you were almost flat, and that was the worst performing large market across the board when everything was up. We do like a few sectors in India. Consumer sector is good. Automobiles, the rural development, everything that comes out of the infrastructure investments is a positive. Banks are a positive. We're concerned about inflation now. El Nino effect is very strong. I think there has been impact on the crop across the country that could add on to the inflation effects of oil. So it's not a market that we expect to generate significant upside, but has a role to play as a stabilizing factor, a large economy growing strong enough. At some point, there will be a recovery.
Yeah, and oil obviously having an outsized effect on the inflation story in India as well. And I'm just wondering your views on the trajectory for the oil price. You mentioned that, all these crises get resolved eventually. When do you see this issue in the Strait of Hormuz settling down, energy prices and markets returning to somewhat normal?
I don't think even President Trump has an idea of when he's going to stop this, but it's the uncertainty that's affecting investors. What we can factor in is for how long the markets can sustain what level of oil prices, and anything above 100 for more than a few weeks is very risky for emerging markets and importers of oil. We think that we will keep having these conversations. We saw that there was a backing off this weekend when there had been a severe escalation for the last 12, 13 days. And we think this cycle is going to continue. But then what that allows countries to do is replenish some of the reserves, some of the flows go out, and the pressure on oil comes down. So we are factoring in that volatility. We do not know if we'll have the resolution this year.
All right, Polka, we're out of time, unfortunately, but thanks so much for joining us today. Polka Mishra, partner at Javelin Wealth Management. Still to come, India's youth protest movement vowing further action after handing Prime Minister Modi one of his biggest political setbacks. We'll speak with Brown University's Yamini Aiyar about what the resignation means for Modi's image and his standing with young voters. That's up next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. You're watching Insights. Let's take a quick look at where markets stand. We've got mainland China heading to lunch, Japan coming back online. And it's a pretty interesting day. We've got the Nikkei in positive territory now. It wasn't before, only modestly so, better by 0.25%. The Hang Seng Index having a pretty good day, better by 0.8%. We also had that very good debut by Chinese tech firm CXMT, rising dramatically in its listing. The CSI 300 better by 0.25% as well. Where the red is, well, it's the Kospi and the TAIEX, those two tech-heavy indexes, losing a bit of ground. Brent crude also losing a bit of ground, 92.83 a barrel now. This is after the US pauses airstrikes. That's 2 nights in a row now. Iran is in talks with Oman over the Strait of Hormuz as well. So some reasons for cautious optimism around the energy story. Right, let's take a look at futures for India now as well. It was a big weekend, of course, particularly for those protesters of the Cockroach Janta Party having their demands secured. The resignation of the Education Minister. We'll get to that story momentarily. The rupee strengthening a little as well, perhaps a function of that softer oil price, 96.15 there, backing away from record lows. Few earnings to watch out for later today in India as well. Tata Power Company, Tata Chemicals, Coal India, Bharat Electronics, all reporting numbers later today. Well, India's Prime Minister has announced what he calls a high-powered task force on exam reforms. Narendra Modi made the announcement in a video statement released a day after his Education Minister resigned, and that's following nationwide student protests over exam paper leaks.
We have appointed a high-powered task force under the leadership of world-renowned technology expert Nandan Nilekani, which will focus on examination reforms. The report from this task force will help improve reliability of India's upcoming examinations as soon as possible.
But even after the Prime Minister's assurances, the leader of the so-called Cockroach Janta Party is vowing further actions after the youth protest movement forced the first resignation of a Modi cabinet minister due to public pressure. South Asia economy editor Ruchi Bhatia joins us now from New Delhi. So Ruchi, what does the Education Minister's resignation mean for Prime Minister Modi?
This is definitely a big climb down for Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Remember, the government had been trying to fend off pressure after these protesters tried to march to the parliament, and there were signs of the police using tear gas shells as well as batons as well. And that was when the protest also galvanized a lot of other students from other areas. The protest spilled on to other states as well. And, the pressure was really rising on Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and in a way to cut his losses, because this was leading to a broader discontent as well. We saw Dharmendra Pradhan, the Education Minister, finally tendering his resignation as well. As far as what it means next, you have seen that the government has been saying that there will be a high-powered task force headed by Nandan Nilekani. Remember, Nandan Nilekani is somebody who has worked very closely with the government on pushing out digital public infrastructure as well. So that will come into force. There is an anti-paper leak bill that the government will be bringing in the parliament on Monday. And besides that, a whole host of other steps that had been taken in the past as well. Several officials from the National Testing Agency that were conducting the medical exams were shunted out. There were a lot of changes made in the bureaucracy as well. But all in all, as I said, this is a major clampdown for Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And, it doesn't mean that the protest is getting over, that things will become very easy for him. Probably this is just a start of what is to come, because the Cockroach Janta Party has vowed that they will continue to take up youth-related issues in the other states as well. And the opposition will also up its ante in the parliament, having promised that they will be asking the government questions on what led to the police brutality that we saw here on the streets on Monday in New Delhi.
What's next for the Parliament now as well? Because this did cause some disruption for the sitting schedule.
Oh, absolutely. The last 5 days we saw of the monsoon session were a complete washout. The opposition, opposition was up in the arms against the government, and now we do expect, as I said, the government will be bringing in the anti-paper law bill in the parliament that will look at making sweeping changes and announcing punishment as well whenever a paper leak happens. But as I said, for the opposition, it needs to be seen whether they will be able to take the current momentum and be able to really catapult it into something else as well. They will be taking up the issue of police atrocities that we saw on the streets of Monday. So there will be a lot of action that one will have to keep an eye out for as far as India's parliament is concerned as well.
All right, Bloomberg South Asia economy editor Rishi Bhatia there. Thank you. Let's get some more on the fallout from the youth protests now with Yamini Aiyar, professor of practice at Brown University. Yamini, thanks so much for joining us. And I just want to start with your view of what the implications are for Prime Minister Modi. This is a very rare setback for him.
Yes, I think it's been a really important and I would say a watershed moment over this last week. It has demonstrated both the extent of deep discontentment. The protest was triggered by the examination paper leaks, and the resignation of the education minister became the core mobilizational issue. But really, the protest expanded much beyond that to express a discontentment with the nature of the Indian economic growth story that has never actually structurally failed to create and generate jobs for the aspiring young, a failure of an education system that hasn't been invested in a manner that makes the young capacitated and capable in a modern economy. But most importantly, also a frustration with a government whose governance style has been broadly extremely authoritarian and not very sensitive to people's issues. And it is that frustration that came out. The demand for the resignation of the minister was very much at the heart of a fundamental core truth about democracy, that actors, elected actors, have to be responsive to and accountable to the citizenry. And in shaping this demand, the protesters were really articulating a demand for core democracy to get back to doing the job that democracy has to do, which is to ensure that government is accountable to citizens. So I think it's a very important sign of the extent of discontentment, both with the economy and with the structure of governance.
Well, the protesters got what they wanted, which was the removal of the education minister or the resignation of that minister. But is a new education minister really going to solve these problems? And, Narendra Modi, we heard they're announcing a new task force, which is going to be headed up by the former Infosys CEO to reform the system. Are these the answers that are going to satisfy the protesters?
Well, the core demand of the resignation of the education minister was certainly fulfilled. But as I said, the protest was an expression of a much deeper discontentment that no single committee can fix. This is fundamentally about re-looking at the structure of India's economic growth and the nature of public investment in India's education system, the structure of India's education system itself, which is extremely rote-oriented, which does not actually create a broad-based quality of education, and the pyramid on the top is so narrow that the scale of competition is so high for a very limited supply of high quality higher education institutions. So we need a complete structural reset. Committee after committee have been set up. The paper leaks that caused the trigger for this protest is not new. It has been happening in India for some time now, and we've had sporadic protests in many parts of the country over the last few years. Committees were set up up. In 2024, a Radhakrishnan committee was set up to look into this matter. It went to the courts as well, and no action was taken. So really, it is important that a committee was set up, in that it shows some reaction and response to the deep discontentment and distress that was articulated through this process, and that the government has recognized it and is responding. But the answer is not going to lie in a committee. The answer is going to lie in a much broader attempt to reset the structure and nature of the Indian economic growth story, alongside with a serious investment in the quality of schooling in this country.
There's a very interesting election coming up as well in Uttar Pradesh, the most populous state in India, 240 million people. To what degree is unemployment, issues facing the youth, going to be a key theme now? And how do you see this playing out with possibly a newly emboldened opposition?
Well, unemployment has been a core electoral issue for some time now. If you look at the 2024 general election, where in the key state of Uttar Pradesh that you just mentioned, which also is the home of the ideological experimentation that shapes the Hindutva majoritarian ideology that shapes the ideological contours of this government, they lost quite remarkably in a significant number of seats in the state of Uttar Pradesh. And the overarching issue there was unemployment. The young in the state repeatedly said, it shows up in surveys, it showed up in my own work in the state, that we are tired and exhausted by a politics that consistently seeks to polarize us, when what we really want is jobs and a better life. And really, this is what has been articulated in these protests as well. However, I think it's important for us to be a little bit more reflective about what is happening in India today. After the 2024 general election, the Modi government, the BJP, has in fact won almost every single state election where it has been in contention over these last 2 years. In fact, even days before the Cockroach Janata Party was formed, and this kind of unleashing of discontentment that contributed to the Instagram followers and eventually young people coming out on the streets, the BJP won a very, very crucial election in the eastern state of West Bengal. And so the question that we really have to ask is, to what extent is the electoral structure in India today a site for expressing and articulating accountability for government, and to what extent does that demand for accountability come outside of the formal party process on the streets? So, we have to think harder about this. It's not clear how many of these issues are shaping the electoral dynamics. But if I were the BJP today, given the kind of discontentment that came out on the streets and the unleashing of fear that had silenced people, the irreverence with which young people came out and asked questions of the government, the language that they used, the tools that they used, how this spread, I would be very, very worried. This is one of the poorest states where the challenge of education and the challenge of unemployment is significant. It was already present in the 2024 general election. It is likely that it will shape the contours of the discourse in the 2027 state elections. As for the opposition, this is the opportunity. It has not been a level playing field. The opposition has made its mistakes, but the BJP's governance style and its authoritarian tentacles run deep. And over the last few years in particular, we have seen a lot of attempt at both reshaping the electoral process through efforts that are reworking the electoral rolls, but also breaking up opposition parties when they are weak, and bringing opposition party members of parliament onto the side of the BJP in different ways and forms, which had kind of weakened the opposition, and it was really struggling. The fact that people came out on the streets and the governance of the BJP's government was being challenged on the streets gives the opposition an opportunity to leverage this broad societal discontent and afford a stronger challenge to the BJP going forward.
Yeah, and what about the Cockroach Janata Party? Because it started as a joke. It's certainly not a joke anymore. To what degree has it been emboldened? How do you see it evolving as a political force over the coming weeks and months?
The Cockroach Janata Party gained its popularity and relevance in the Indian public sphere on the back of a deep discontentment and a deep economic discontentment and a deep silence in India's democracy, a silence that came out of fear owing to an increased use of authoritarian tendencies that had made it much harder within the public sphere to challenge the government. Satire that came off-the-cuff remark made by the Chief Justice of India back in May, where he referred to unemployed youth. He later corrected himself to say he was only talking about unemployed lawyers as cockroaches, suddenly gave a vocabulary for India's young to express their discontentment both with their everyday realities and the realities of their polity. And it just unleashed itself and became so much larger. Everything that the government tried to do, particularly the symbol of this movement became an activist, Sonam Wangchuk, who went on a hunger strike for eventually 25 days. But around the 19th, 20th day of his hunger strike in New Delhi, the government did what it is used to doing, which is to use its coercive sources of power to try and shut down the protest by picking him up from the protest site and more or less arresting him and keeping him in hospital. The assumption was that this would calm things down and send a message to people coming to the protest site that the state has its guns out, its batons out, be careful. Yet people just drew on the language of satire. Their frustrations came out, and they came in large numbers. And those large numbers are symbolic of the fact that this issue was much beyond a singular exam leak and a singular demand for the resignation of one person. It was about a democratic accountability and through an expression of discontentment. So the Cockroach Janata Party were the catalyst of something that has become much larger. The Cockroach Janata Party now, I think, has an opportunity to become an important pressure point that draws on these issues and mobilizes the youth to place these pressure points into the public sphere and ensure that the feedback loops reach our former political space, both the government that's in power as well as the opposition. It is also very important that the Cockroach Janata Party keep a very careful vigilance on many of its demands. The resignation was one aspect, but other important demands were made, particularly in terms of protecting those who came to the protests, who fought for their rights against further police action. We know from the history of these last few years that the government can be quite coercive, and it is important that they stay vigilant to ensure that democratic rights of those who participated in the protests are protected. So they have a long task ahead of them.
All right, Yamini Aiyar, Professor of Practice at Brown University. Thanks so much for joining us today. Now, Bloomberg Economics believes Prime Minister Modi's decision to concede to the youth protesters' demands marks his costliest political retreat since taking office. South Asia geonomics analyst Chetna Kumar joins us now for more. Chetna, what does this say about the Indian economy, and what's the immediate impact?
Well, these events may not have immediate macroeconomic or market implications, but they are quite significant for India's growth trajectory overall. As Ruchi and Yamini have just said, youth employment or employment in general has not kept in pace with India's broader growth and particularly education opportunities. And the employment challenge is certainly quite urgent. India's been the fastest growing economy for the last decade, fastest growing major economy, but there's real anger and discontent hiding behind these headline growth numbers. India also has the world's largest youth population and a very rare demographic window at the moment. It has this sort of, the share of the working age population relative to the larger population is going to start peaking and then declining 2030 onwards. That makes the job challenge quite immediate for this country as a whole.
So what's this going to mean for Narendra Modi's policy agenda?
Modi certainly seems to have cut his losses immediately to sort of refocus his attention to his legislative agenda. He's trying urgently to implement women's reservation in Parliament and sort of grow the size of Parliament. That's up for this session of Parliament, and we'll see over the next few days if the political opposition is able to use this momentum to impose sustained pressure on him. But the speed at which the youth protest was able to force him into retreat is likely to galvanize other pressure groups in society. And remember, India is facing challenges from the Iran war. It's one of those countries where fuel prices have not fully passed on to the consumer. There's still no trade deal with the US. The tariffs are still looming. And in that situation, if other groups are able to mobilize and put pressure on the government, Modi's policy space may narrow just as these sort of challenges are rising. That's certainly something we're watching. The government is likely to try and rebound. It has some room before the next elections to come back. We're seeing a bunch of countermeasures being put in place, but the degree to which these other groups are able to mobilize will show how much policy space Modi has in the future.
Bloomberg's geoeconomics analyst for South Asia, Chetna Kumar, thank you. Still to come, Nvidia's CEO declares a golden age for Korea, announcing the company's taking a stake in Naver under a $1 billion investment deal. We hear exclusively from Jensen Huang next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. You're watching Insight. Nvidia is buying a 4.5% stake in South Korea's Naver under a $1 billion strategic investment deal. The deal comes as CEO Jensen Huang tells Bloomberg exclusively that Korean tech is experiencing a golden age and the country is well positioned to lead the world's AI infrastructure build-out.
This is the golden ages for Korea, as you know. Their semiconductor business is booming. Their industrial business is booming. You know, this is a country that has the ability to help the world build out the AI infrastructure, that they're incredibly adept at adopting new technologies, and is a really technologically forward-leaning society. And they love using AI. AI has really diffused throughout their society and their industry. And so this is a great time for them. We're announcing several things. We announced a big partnership with SK Group, where our companies are going to enter into a business partnership where we do over $500 billion of business with each other, whether it's consumption of and purchasing of memories or selling AI supercomputers to them as they scale out 2 gigawatts of AI factories. There's a whole bunch of other announcements. We're investing $1 billion in Naver to help. They're the Korea's leading AI cloud. They're going to scale up in Korea up to they're going to scale up 200 megawatts, I think it is, and they're going to expand across the world. And so we have a whole bunch of announcements that we're making today.
With the expanded SK relationship, there's also sort of more direct involvement with Nvidia on the roadmap for HBM, future generations of HBM. Talk about that. You know, I remember you being on stage earlier this year saying 5 years ago we told our supply chain what was going to happen, and it did happen. And you gave some credit to the memory makers in going with you on that journey. But clearly you want to be involved in the direction of travel for future generations of HBM.
Yeah, we're working together on, of course, we started with HBM2, worked on HBM3, 3E, 4, 4E, and then beyond. And so we've got a whole roadmap of memories that we're working on together. It is also the case that the semiconductor industry has really changed. And the reason for that, because we used to build computers for people to use, and we're going to still continue to build incredible computers. These are now processing AIs for humans to collaborate with. But in the future, we also have AI agents and robots, and they're going to be using computers. So instead of just 1 billion people using computers, we're going to have 100 billion agents and billions of robots all using computers. The computer industry, the chip that's built on top of the chip industry, surely is not big enough. And so this is one of the realizations of the semiconductor industry, that now computers are built not just for people to use, but computers are being built for computers to use. My guess is that the semiconductor industry is probably going to have to be 10 times larger than it is today over the next decade or so. And so working with our partners in Korea and around the world to scale up the supply chain of semiconductors so that we're prepared for this AI future is really important.
Before we go, here's a look at tomorrow's show. Tata Power's quarterly earnings, as well as India's energy markets, will be in focus as we talk to the company's CEO, Praveer Sinha. And we'll talk markets and geopolitical risks with SEB's Eugenia Victorino and HSBC's Yun Liu. That's it for Insight. Horizons Middle East and Africa is up next. Keep it here with us. This is Bloomberg.